Hi, good morning. With the fifth and final season of You releasing next week, I thought it would be fun to recap Joe's body count from the first four seasons. Since the final season will reveal how Joe's story ends, let's rewind to the beginning. As a kid, Joe lived with his mother and his abusive father. After trying to run away but returning home, Sandy tried to reassure Joe that they were safe by showing him a gun that she had hidden in the closet and telling him that his father was never going to hurt them again. And she was kind of right, because the next time that Joe's dad starts beating her, Joe grabs the gun and shoots him. So boom, first kill done, and he's not even 10. After this incident, Sandy lost custody of a 9-year-old Joe who went to live in a boys' home for a few years until he was taken in by a local bookstore owner, Ivan Mooney. Mooney disciplined Joe and literally trapped him in a cage in the basement of the bookstore, but apparently that dynamic worked for them. Fast forward to young adulthood, and Joe is working in the bookstore, living in an apartment, and dating Candace, a cool girl from a band called Heathcliff's Misery, a reference to the book Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and hopefully the fate that awaits Joe. Unfortunately, not so cool, Joe finds out that Candace has been cheating on him with the music producer that she's been working with. So Joe confronts Elijah for taking advantage of Candace, and Elijah's like, "Oh, sorry, man, I had no idea, but hey, bitches are gonna be bitches, right?" Wrong. Joe pushes him off the ledge of a building for insulting his cheating girlfriend. Speaking of whom, Candace later breaks up with Joe, but he stops her from leaving, ties her up, and drives her to the woods for a picnic, just for a picnic to reconcile, not to kill her or anything. But she runs, so he chases her, catches her, slams her head on a rock, and buries her alive, believing that he killed her, but he didn't. So he is still at body count 2 until season 1, where Joe meets Beck. With Beck comes the baggage of Benji, who Joe lures to the basement of Mooney's and kills in the cage by dosing his coffee with peanut oil, which Benji is allergic to. Joe didn't just spike his coffee with peanut oil and then he also died for no reason. He died because of the peanut oil, because he's allergic to peanuts, so he can't have peanut oil or else he'll die of anaphylaxis, which he did, so he died. Body count 3. It turns out that killing Benji isn't enough because best friend Peach is also competing for Beck's attention and whisking her away to her family's home out of town, so Joe has to follow them. When Beck leaves early, Peach catches Joe sneaking around, and while she has him at gunpoint, she notices Benji's watch, giving him a chance to escape. She chases him outside, and they end up fighting over the gun until Joe kills Peach and sets the scene to look like a suicide. Sometime later, Joe comes across a curious scene in the hallway and rushes outside to find Ron hunting down Paco, so he stabs Ron in the throat right in front of the kid, and then sends him to clean up the blood in the hallway, making him complicit in covering up a murder and probably traumatizing him for life. Even more so after Joe has Beck trapped in the cage in the basement of Mooney's because she escapes and pleads with Paco through the locked door at the top of the stairs to let her out, but he thinks that she knows about Joe killing Ron, so he leaves her there, and Joe ends up strangling her to death off screen. After Joe uses Beck's writings to solidify his frame job of her therapist, Dr. Nikki, the Dark Face of Love book draws Candace back into Joe's life as she confronts him over doing to Beck what he thought he did to her. This scares Joe into leaving New York with 6 casualties behind him to head to LA, the worst place in the world, and taking on a new name by trapping the real fake Will Bettelheim in a cage that he's constructed in a storage unit. Unfortunately for Joe, shady guy Jasper comes looking for him, believing the fake Will is a real fake Will who really owes him a lot of money. Joe tries to offer up Will to Jasper, but Will isn't the $50,000 cash that Jasper is looking for, so Jasper comes at Joe, who stabs the guy to death with a secret knife. And then, do I have to say it? Because I will, Joe takes Jasper's body to a Navrin, cuts it up into pieces, and puts them through the meat grinder. Yeah, the meat grinder that Love uses to prepare food that human people will eat. It's grinded up a human people. That's disgusting. Jail. Jail for Joe. Because that's horrific. But we don't mourn Jasper, just like we don't mourn Ron, just like we don't mourn this next one, Henderson. Shitty comedian Henderson is also a predator, but not the superior predator in this case, because while he drugs teenage girl Ellie, Joe drugs actual loser Henderson and ties him up in his creepy sex dungeon basement to record a confession of his many assaults against underage girls. Henderson does get loose and tries to escape, but Joe grabs him and yanks him down the stairs, killing him as he hits his head on the wall and bleeds out on the floor. Oh, boo-hoo. Boo-hoo. Child predator died. Don't care. Technically, it was an accident, but Joe had revealed his face, so if it didn't happen that way, it would just happen some other way. The next death chronologically is Delilah, who Joe has restrained in the cage with a pair of timed handcuffs that were set to unlock by the time that he was safely out of the country. But when he decides that he's going to stay in LA, the worst place in the world, he rushes to trap her in the cage before she's released, only to find her dead body with her throat slashed. Well, plot twist, it was Love that killed Delilah, and she proceeds to kill Candace, who was just trying to protect her and show her who Joe really was, but Love has already been knowing. But we're not counting her kills because she's been gone since the end of season 3, so why would we include her in a body count after season 4? I don't know. This is the Joe show. And after realizing that he's met his match and he doesn't like what he sees, Joe almost kills Love, but she reveals that she's pregnant. So instead of killing her, he decides to raise a kid with her. Because that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It doesn't, and it makes even less sense when Love's twin brother 40 finally realizes that the book he's been adapting into a movie, Beck's Dark Face of Love, is actually about Joe, not Dr. Nikki. So he tries to tell Love the truth, which she already knows and accepts, and he wants to protect her from Joe, who literally murdered his last girlfriend. But the chaotic scene leads to police officer Finch coming in and killing 40 with no knowledge of what's actually going on, as cops are wont to do. Leaving LA with only 2 West Coast kills so far, Joe marries Love and they move to Madre Linda where they have their son Henry, and Joe starts obsessing over his neighbor Natalie, so naturally, Love kills her, which sets off a whole thing. Also setting off a whole thing is Gil, whose unvaccinated daughters almost killed baby Henry by giving him the measles. Why do we still have the measles? I guess he thought that buying a few cupcakes would make up for it, but he thought wrong because Love hits him with a rolling pin and traps him in the cage where he eventually kills himself after finding out that his inaction the first time his son assaulted someone led to another girl getting hurt. Yeah, he was so upset that his wife had to handle that on her own that he killed himself, leaving her to handle everything on her own forever. So far in Madre Linda, Joe hasn't killed anyone, but only because he hasn't had anybody to kill for. Once Marianne catches his eye, Joe doesn't hesitate to take a stab at her custody issues by murdering her ex, local news reporter Ryan Goodwin. For a minute, Marianne believes that Ryan was killed in a mugging, but after Joe drops the D word with Love, she goes nuclear and reveals to Marianne that Joe killed Ryan and warns her to leave. Love concludes that Joe is the problem in their relationship and sharpens a knife to kill him, but Joe shoots her with a dose of wolfsbane, paralyzing her and stopping her heart. Joe chops off some toes, bakes them into a pie, writes up a psychotic confession framing Love, and sets their house on fire before leaving Henry with a loving couple and setting off to search for Marianne. Just like LA, Joe only killed 2 people in Madre Linda, but don't worry, he goes kill crazy once he loses his mind in London. First, he heads to Paris and spots Marianne's art in a park, which leads him to finding her in London and abducting her, as Joes are wont to do. While he has her trapped in a new cage, he compartmentalizes himself into his new identity of Professor Jonathan Moore and sets off on a murder spree that he doesn't even realize he's committing. It starts with Malcolm, a fellow professor who set up Joe with his flat, which just happens to look in on the apartment that Malcolm shares with his girlfriend Kate, and that's totally not weird at all. After Joe saved Kate from a mugging, Malcolm invites him out for a night of excessive drinking and drugging, and Joe says something so profound to Lady Phoebe that she essentially adopts him into their friend group. But I promise you, he said nothing special. It is, you do not need to wonder what Joe said to Phoebe. He threw some basic ass book quote at her, and she thought it was the coolest thing ever because she doesn't fucking read, dude. Malcolm makes the fatal mistake of insulting Marianne before taking Joe home, so a blacked out Joe kills him and wakes up to find his dead body on the kitchen table the next morning, which he does promptly haul to a sawmill to dissect into little pieces. No hesitation. The next to go is Simon, who gets exposed for taking advantage of artists apprenticing for him by getting them hooked on drugs and stealing their art. So Joe dissociates, puts on a worker suit, and stabs Simon after his art show. The next day, while she's mourning Malcolm, Kate visits his grave and Joe follows her, not knowing that Lady Phoebe's bodyguard Vic is following him. Once Kate leaves, Vic confronts Joe and even finds Malcolm's ring in his pocket, which confirms his suspicions of Joe and forces Joe to kill Vic in self-defense, which is his first conscious murder since arriving in London. With the serial killer seemingly targeting them, the group retreats to Lady Phoebe's family estate and Joe tags along to protect them, not realizing that all it'll take is Kate complaining about Gemma for like a second before he subconsciously decides to kill her. And he follows through. After being pushed out of a window and landing on a bush, Joe staggers into Kate's room and stabs Gemma before climbing back up on the bush so he can wake up unaware of what he just did. I'm sorry, you might hate season 4, but I think that locked away, compartmentalized Dark Joe trying to break out of his box and fucking with Joe in the process is the funniest thing. That is literally Joe torturing himself and delighting in making the delusional good man in a cruel world side of him miserable for denying his truth. That's great. He deserves that. He deserves that internal torture. I want that for him. Kate finds Gemma's body and feels manipulated in helping Joe hide it, but he explains that he thinks somebody is trying to frame her, like somebody tried to frame him by leaving Malcolm's body in his apartment. Because reminder, Joe still believes that somebody else is committing these murders, and by the end of their trip to the Hampsey estate, he thinks that somebody else is Rhys Montrose, a local politician who Joe is unknowingly deeply obsessed with and hallucinating. So when Kate's billionaire father arrives in London to disrupt Rhys's campaign and runs a story that drives him out of the city, Joe is given the perfect opportunity to torture and kill the man that he thinks has been killing Kate's friends. But the real Rhys Montrose has never met Joe, making Joe's 15th kill maybe the most undeserved, considering the only thing Rhys ever did for Joe was write a book that resonated with him. Believing the murder was done at his request and not solely because Joe is a crazy person, Town Lockwood handles the disposal of the body, which seems like a bad idea for an experienced body disposer like Joe to leave in the hands of somebody else, and yeah, it proves to be a bad idea because Rhys's body is found with lingering DNA evidence. Because what did you think? You're dating the guy's daughter. Bad move on Tom's part, made even worse when he claims ownership over Kate because bro doesn't know that she belongs to Joe, which means if you make Kate cry, you have to die. So Joe lures Tom to his own airplane hangar where he feels so untouchable that there are no security cameras, and he sends away his bodyguard Hugo because he thinks that he's meeting up with Kate. But surprise, it's Joe and his imaginary friend Rhys to kill you and your bodyguard. It's a twofer, bringing Joe's body count to 17. And it's almost a threefer when Joe jumps off a bridge to kill himself, but he survives. And after confirming to Kate in the hospital that he did kill Rhys, which she thinks he did at her father's instruction, they decide to put their past behind them and move forward with the promise to keep each other good. So Joe immediately checks out of the hospital and kills Eddie, one of his students, and frames Nadia for both Eddie and Rhys's murders, planting his own obsession box as evidence in Nadia's room and handing her the knife that he used to kill Eddie to make it look as if she killed Eddie for finding out that she killed Rhys. In total, that brings Joe's body count to 18 murders, with 8 of them happening in London alone and 1 of them not happening. Marianne, she makes it out alive with Nadia's help by faking an overdose and leaving a note for her body to be left where it can be found so that Juliet doesn't wait for her mom forever. Is that all Joe's doing? Waiting for his mom to come fill the hole that she left in him? Like, killing one person made her leave. Maybe killing 20 people will bring her back. He is definitely gonna break 20 lifetime kills by the end of the show. I think there's a handful of kills in the trailer alone, so how many people do you think Joe's gonna kill in season 5? Let me know any theories you have down in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe. Please and thank you. Bye. Thanks for the D, Will. Bye. Bro, I might make a video about Candace, just so I can wear these glasses again. And I might remake my Sandy video, and I'm definitely making a video about Marianne at some point. I am going to make a video about all of the women in You. If no one else is going to do it, I'll do it. Fine. I'll do it myself.